there were a lot of Californians and Georgians moving back and forth because of the film industry. I even talked to a couple of them when I was living in California, and they were bragging about how, yeah, I can vote in Georgia, I can vote in California. And it is not uncommon, by the way, that when they say that, it is, and is that the biggest cause of voter fraud? No, it's the election officials allowing that to happen.
All right, I am joined today, and I made the mistake of not asking how to pronounce early, so I'm going to give it a shot. Is it Eric Abbenante?
Very, very close. Abinante. Very, very
Ah,
good though. Very good.
okay.
I'm impressed with your bravery as well because it's an intimidating last name.
Yeah, well, there's too many N's. It just is like one less N. It would be like, okay, but you
Yeah,
just,
yeah, exactly. And it's Hunlier.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But,
But
no, it's great to meet you, Eric.
hey, great to meet you. I've been following you on X for a while. You do a good job of sharing, especially kind of pop culture, mixing with political content, Bill Maher, things like that. I've been reading, some of the threads that you've done, and I like what you're putting out. And at one point, you were replying to somebody, or somehow it was there, but you put out that you had done a film on, we'll call it election fortification. But the film is actually the American history of voter fraud.
I care not who casts the votes of a nation, provided I can count them. As long as I count the votes, what are you going to do about it?
Nobody will ever deprive the American people of the right to vote except the American people themselves.
No, Eric, what inspired you to go down this path?
Well, first of all, the we just doing some quick research after the 2020 election when they had claimed that it was the most secure election of all time. I looked into the fact that there had never even been a film documenting the entire history of documented rigged elections. These are not like in dispute elections. These are, in what used to be in your history textbooks were acknowledged as rigged elections. And then at some point, they just stopped teaching that history. And I thought, oh, it'd be cool to have an entire compilation of all of the entire history. And it goes back to the 1800s of documented rigged American elections, and it goes, and then we go all the way up into 2020. It basically centers around the 1874 election, 1960, 2020, those three elections, and then a lot of stuff in between. But yeah, it was just the fact that it had never been done before was such a attractive thing for documentary, in the sense that you're always trying to break new ground and be pioneering in some way. And the fact that it was such a taboo subject really made me think that, oh, this is an important subject, and turned out to be. And it turned into a cult classic because, again, it's the only one on that subject. And so a lot of people have to go and reference it. I've had a lot of people tell me when they, like when they're doing debates on this subject, oftentimes I am told that they are referencing our film, or at least watching it to research. And so I've always appreciated that aspect of it, in that it stood the test of time, and it's aged very well.
Definitely. And let's go back into it because one thing you brought up is like sometimes you learn history and you sort of forget it, and then you're reminded again. You're like, oh, that's right, and that was the role possibly in Edgar Allan Poe's death because of cooping, and that kind of rolls into like the gangs of New York style. But do you want to talk about that a little bit? Because I think it's a great little nugget that a lot of people don't realize with this crossing over of, again, pop
Yeah,
culture.
with voter, well, people don't realize that voter, like we wax poetically about the democratic system, but we don't often go through the flaws and the progress we've had to make because of various forms of attempted cheating. And so, one of the most basic attempts at cheating back in the day, it wasn't very sophisticated, mind you, but this was a very common form, which is you would just abduct a voter who was going to vote for your opponent and beat them up until they were going to vote for your guy. And it was called cooping. And this was such a common practice that at one point they found the famous poet Edgar Allan Poe, who actually is the reason that the Baltimore Ravens have their name in football. So he's a very impactful figure in American history. And so people didn't realize that he died on election day outside of a polling location in Baltimore, and he was just beaten. And so it was a safe assumption that he had died from the practice of cooping. And so it is that's just one piece of example of voter fraud is not only important, it saves lives if we talk about it.
There you go. And yes, Edgar Allan Poe is a giant in literature. He literally is one of the first mystery novelists. He invented the detective story, and is a huge figure. So it's crazy to consider that. And I think he was only like in his 30s when he died.
Yeah, and why is this important? Because one of the central themes of this film is that history is written by the winners, and if
Mhm.
those winners won by cheating, then you're not going to ever have an examination of the system that allowed them to cheat to win.
Voter fraud is not committed individually, but organizationally. And evidently, this organization would benefit from the fraudulent elected official, or at worst, control that politician. Tammany Hall, a Democratic political organization, and its leader, Boss Tweed, would rig elections throughout mid to late 1800s.
And so this is where we feel that this film is quite important because it actually strengthens democracy to look at the flaws inherent within democracy and how you can manipulate it to consolidate power.
I agree. Now, one thing of note back then, both sides were beating people up and having gangs, et
And
cetera, to do the
and
elections.
this is important. This film goes over both sides committing fraud.
Mhm.
It is not a partisan film at all, and that is actually to the ire of some people that it wasn't a cheerleader film. But it is important because in the end, both parties have been accused in doing this. In each stage of it as well. For like you're talking about the basic, your basic elections that have no machines. 1909 is when we implemented voting machines that were not connected to the internet. And then in the around the 90s, early 2000s is when you started to have voting machines that were a little more sophisticated in technology, adding computers, etc. We we go over each stage of it, but a lot of people I notice when they talk about this subject, they only talk about the third stage, which is those voting machines with computers attached to the internet. Whereas there are far more documented rigged elections in the first two stages. And we cover those quite extensively, but we do cover voting machine tampering as well.
I agree. The voting machine tampering probably is lesser compared to when you're talking about traditional standards. Box 13 comes to mind with good old LBJ. And I feel like that's kind of a good old fashioned style of, okay, how many votes do they have? All right, let's go run the Mexicans. Let's get them. Let's go look more, more, more. And
And by the way, for those who were like wondering what Eric was referencing, LBJ was a Spanish teacher, and so he actually had access to the Spanish speaking population in a way that other politicians couldn't, and he was able to manipulate the Spanish speaking population in his favor for fraud. So that is what Eric was referencing there earlier.
yes, and specifically it was the election, I think, of 1948, where he got that nickname Landslide Lyndon.
Hmm.
And it was a box, literally was found with, coincidentally, just enough votes to take him over the top. I forgot what he won the election by. What was
It
it?
was like
50?
83.
Yeah, it's
It was such a slim margin. Yeah, and that's why, you see, allegedly, like, more of, like, a 10,000 bump now, like, that's your margin of, like, around, like, a 10,000 to 30,000. In modern times, you would see that as, like, the bump because you wouldn't want that derisive landslide Lyndon nickname.
Lyndon Baines Johnson is the most famous politician that rose to prominence through documented voter fraud in the 20th century.
well, also it triggers recounts in a lot of areas now. I mean,
It
it's like
does,
if
and
it's
we
within a
yeah, we go
small.
over in the film the American definition of voter fraud is you have to find enough votes that would change the outcome of the election. So if you found fraud, if it was 1,000 vote margin and you found 999 fraudulent votes, that wouldn't count. It only counts once you find enough to overturn the election.
Yeah, which is a pretty high bar to cross. Now,
And you have to fund this investigation yourself. It is under a very truncated amount of time, and you're being called a spoiled loser, a cheater, etc. during the entire time.
all true, all true. Now, the reason why I think this is such a big concern is I would argue that there are systems in place because a lot of this cheating, however you want to put it, is not blatantly obvious. It's like through a series of systems that help shift the numbers one way or another.
And
Wouldn't you
the
agree?
system is an election official, and so we use voter fraud because that's the catch-all term people understand. But actually, the voters themselves are the least likely to commit this act. It is an election official, and an election official has the most access to manipulate the system. And in the film, we go over honest election officials describing to you the vulnerabilities within the system and how they could manipulate it and change the outcome. And then we go over various examples, most notably, as a good example, in Philadelphia, there was a political consultant and an election judge. And through series of payoffs, they would determine outcomes of elections in that area for 3+ decades.
Right. And th- there are different modes of doing it. For example, with the LBJ election that we just mentioned, 1948, votes were discovered.
He was running for Senate against Coke Stevens. Johnson won by 87 votes out of about 1 million votes that were cast. The election was stolen. There are hearings were held on this at the time. All the witnesses are testifying the same way, except Louis Salas, who was the election judge in the crucial precinct, Box 13 in Jim Wells County. And I asked him about the discrepancy between his testimony and everybody else's. And he said, well, that's simple, Robert. I lied under oath.
Uh, Another way some shenanigans occur, though, is when votes are suppressed. So, as an example, if you're, let's say, collecting ballots in an area in a drop box, and that area is heavily of a particular party, if those votes happen to disappear, that would possibly affect the outcome.
Yeah, so not only is there ballot harvesting as you referenced, but there is ballot elimination. Now, ballot elimination is going to allegedly occur unsupervised by election officials mainly because they're going to need to discern what vote is an enemy ballot to eliminate or one to save. And so the scaling up of the voter fraud for the election officials is typically done by these harvesters. And you've seen this practice expanded as mail in voting was expanded. And we show you the moment that started to occur in the state of Minnesota in the 70s and how that push kept expanding all the way into the 2020 election. And really quick, vast majority of our elections were always 80 to 90% in person on election day votes. In 2020, we had this aberrant election where 25% of your votes were in person on election day, whereas 75% were the other means. And so that is why the 2020 election stands alone as something to look at as potential fraud, because they had changed the rules and potentially in an unconstitutional fashion to do so.
Well, and there's other reasons to explore it too. Like there were more overall votes cast than the election prior and then the election after. So while our population is growing, theoretically, 2024 should have had equal or maybe even more votes, but the number dropped back down to be closer to 2016. And I think that warrants exploration into overall votes. And I understand the convenience factor could have come in, whereas like, oh, well, happened to have a ballot. It was just sent to me. It was very easy, but the numbers are pretty
An
far apart.
example of what Eric is talking about, we reference another example for the 1960 election, which is pretty startling. Um, in the film, we allege that political machines in Texas and Illinois flipped that election. And so in Illinois, in particular, in Cook County, where Chicago is, there were more votes in Cook County in Chicago area in 1960 than every election after, and that includes the Obama elections, Trump election, Biden, etc. I mean, that's pretty startling, and it was because there was accusations of the mafia, etc., being involved in various forms of ballot harvesting, etc. And most people think of it like the cooping, actually, like that's what the mafia was doing. No, it was more boring forms of voter fraud at that point, a lot less scandalous, but still, at that point, it's a lot easier to scale up too. But that is a great example. Again, in 2020, I do agree that that didn't look good for them. It didn't help their case that it was the most secure election ever.
No, and by the way, 1960 election, I think most people agree that something weird went down in Illinois at a minimum. I think most historians pretty much acknowledge, yeah, it was a little bit odd. But one thing that was interesting, I didn't realize my show partner works with RFK at times, and RFK Jr. pointed out that even with Chicago or Illinois and Texas going to Nixon, he still would have lost, because the electoral count was
Well,
that far.
no, we go through that in the film, and we show you like if those two states flip, it pushes him over. But they might have confused the fact that Hawaii might have changed that, I guess. But we go through that in the film. It's just those two states, and that would have actually flipped it. And there's other things in that election that we didn't even cover. For instance, the infamous West Virginia primary that involved the mafia. There was only one source on that, which is, I believe, Frank Sinatra's daughter, if I remember correctly. But or someone juicy like that. It was pretty cool. But it was one source, so we didn't, But that one's like commonly alleged. There were a lot of, like you said, there were a lot of shenanigans that went on in 1960 that were interesting. Again, we go over this in the film. We show you all the footage of election night. They stopped the counting in California, just like in 2020. And so and they called a couple states wrong, Hawaii and California, on the original broadcast. And so it's not that, it's the film does not say for sure these are rigged elections. We point out historical precedents, like for instance January 6th, 1961. We show that, and to establish the precedent of January 6th, 2020, of, hey, in January 6th, 1961, JFK was able to have an alternate slate of electors presented, and Nixon, because he was the vice president at the time, playing the Mike Pence role, was able to accept the alternate slate. Why didn't Hawaii handle it? Well, the Hawaii governor actually did not have the authority to retabulate or do anything. He had to leave it to January 6th to present the evidence. And we make that point to make the point that on January 6th, 2021, we had the interruption of that evidence. And because the interruption of that evidence, technically, you do have to say that Joe Biden won because there wasn't evidence presented to the contrary. It would have been through the 6 states, right? And if you had presented and they could have been accepted or rejected, would have been like a 2-hour process for each state, totaling 12 hours. Would have been a long civics lesson that would have been great for the country, but a little boring. But it would have been non-controversial at all. It wouldn't have been at all what we remember January 6th as. And so that's the unfortunate thing is, um, however you view the proceedings of January 6th, it is fact that they interrupted the actual presenting of the evidence. And therefore, no matter how you view the election, unfortunately, as it stands, Joe Biden won because they weren't able to present evidence otherwise. On Bill Maher, they had talked about Oklahoma actually requiring students to learn that the 2020 election was tainted by fraud.
After the media realized stoking fear, anger, and frustration into the public was the most lucrative tactic, they began exploiting this exponentially. The media built a mob mentality that manipulates the public to instinctively shoot the messenger.
And I feel that is even too slanted to the other side now, of because it, you're. It, I feel that if you present the evidence in the way that you watch it in American History of Voter Fraud, adults can come to the conclusion that, oh, there was something suspicious about how the 2020 election was set up. But to blatantly tell somebody that it was, I think is now slanting unfairly in the other direction, just like saying it's the most secure election ever.
Yes, I think that the best argument would be things happen that give a bad appearance, and we need to clean it up so people don't have any reason to fret over things, if that makes sense. Like, it may or may not have been bad, but sometimes things that they just look bad enough, you need to fix it so it doesn't look so bad.
Yeah, and so this is the counting for days, if not almost a week after election
Well,
night.
that's 2024, and I wanted to discuss that with you because California,
You mean 2020?
no, 2024, the election just happened.
Okay.
California has set up a law, and
Oh,
I think they have 60 days. They have a ridiculous amount of time
okay,
to
yeah.
count the ballots, and coincidentally, certain seats got flipped over this time. It's like, I don't know how that is. Why is it the longer the vote count takes, one party seems to come out on top? It's a very odd situation that, directionally speaking, it seems to almost always err in favor of one side.
Well, here's how I would phrase it. The the party that controls the cities, the major cities, they're the ones who have the inherent advantage in voter fraud. Now let me explain it to you this way. Where my wife is from, Washington State, King County, where Seattle is. If you control King County, you control the election in Washington State because all the other counties combined do not have the power of that one county. Okay. And so it's more of the party that controls the major cities. And right now that happens to be a certain party, but that's where you have the true advantages in this system. And that can be the issue of what you're talking about. If you control certain counties, if you or even if you incentivize your election officials in an ideological manner to the point where they just want to do it. And it's because they want their team to win. You don't have to necessarily pay anybody allegedly.
No,
This
I agree a lot. That's why I mentioned about bags of votes. Um,
which has been
there were some postal workers who were caught throwing entire, bags of votes away
Yeah, and
on
this
their
is
own.
a long practice that we cover various court cases of this happening in a documented fashion.
Former Acorn canvasser Tyara Williams is wearing the electronic ankle bracelet to prove it.
I'm on 2-year probation, 4 months of house arrest.
23-year-old Tyara was one of 8 Acorn employees to plead guilty to fraud during the 2006 federal elections in Missouri.
One of the funnier ones is the New Jersey election officials in the 70s, because they were carrying around your votes in like shopping bags, and like they were counting them literally in the politician's home that they were allegedly rigging the election for. And actually, that one, you don't have to say alleged, that one happened. I'm just saying it for YouTube. But it's like, that is this is a common concern. And again, the election officials don't have any less power than they did in the 60s or any other time that we are covering this. They still have this power to completely sway elections. And so it is good to cover.
Well, to their credit, Florida was humiliated in 2000. From what I've seen, Florida is a model of a pretty good system now, after they got embarrassed so badly. Like, they have certain rules, like all votes have to be counted by that evening.
So in terms of timing, in terms of limiting the counting afterwards, Florida is a model. Now, when you go to their rolls, Florida has some of the dirtiest voter rolls in the country. What is a dirty roll? A voter roll is just, it's a list of all the voters in your area, but it can be expired. So people move in, people move out, people die, etc. It's mostly the moving in and the moving out. And that's where, and we have election officials admit in the film that, hey, we can update this every 4 years at best. So Florida has over 1 million dirty, expired people on the rolls because of all this moving in and moving out, and they don't clean up their rolls. And so that is a lot of these states have issues, and then some have different models. I believe it's South Dakota or North Dakota. They just have you vote directly. They don't have rolls, because it is actually, it's going to be more it's more easy to manipulate if you have a roll. So actually, it's kind of an interesting system, and I wonder if it could pioneer for the rest of the country. Now, it's a much smaller state, granted, a lot less moving in, moving out. So maybe it's just better on a smaller scale, but it's an interesting way to go about it, because you're at least trying to prevent the fraud at the source. Because again, every 4 years is just not sufficient. An example, in 2020, there were a lot of Californians and Georgians moving back and forth because of the film industry. I even talked to a couple of them when I was living in California, and they were bragging about how, yeah, I can vote in Georgia and I can vote in California. And it is not uncommon, by the way, that when they say that, it is. And is that the biggest cause of voter fraud? No, it's the election officials allowing that to happen. The voters, they aren't that big of a concern. It's the election officials either selectively applying the rules for one team or the other. It's those are the things you actually have to be concerned about when you're talking about the system and
Right.
vulnerabilities of it.
Now, okay, for looking at fortifying it, so we agree that the Florida having everything counted by that day is pretty solid, and it helps, for the clock work. Other questions. My show partner and I were talking about This America's Untold Stories. In Pennsylvania, for example, one of the mayors, Mayor Longo, was saying, we're not going to turn our votes in until the big cities have been counted. There is a possibility of breaking some of that up, correct? If you could say everybody turns in everything at one time versus all the little places turn theirs in, statewide, and then the big city just keeps counting.
I get what they're saying, of like, the smaller counties are more honest and diligent, and they usually get theirs in quickly, and then the big cities lag. and then you put in more resources into the big cities, and they lag even more. So I get what they're saying. I worry that it might set this like vicious cycle of, okay, we're not going to send in stuff, then you're not going to send in stuff, and then it leads to more. One universal standard would solve a lot of that. We have not got to this yet. Voter ID would solve a lot of these issues. The fact that in terms of developed nations, we stand alone and aberrant in that we have the worst voter ID laws of any developed nation, and some undeveloped nations, what you would call, um, like Mexico, India, not exactly the most developed nations in our consideration in some ways, and yet they have vastly more secure election systems. They have actual voter ID laws.
Allegations of voter registration fraud by Georgia Democrats linked to Senate candidate Michelle Nuns. 14 counties in Georgia now voicing complaints about potential voter registration fraud ahead of the midterm elections. 28 confirmed cases of fraud, including forged signatures or false information on 25 voter registration applications and 3 canvassing sheets.
So uh, it's a those are the things that actually would help as much as anything. Making election day a national holiday so that you could incentivize in-person voting, rather than having, this whole mail-in system. There are so many ways you can improve the system. A fun, more speculative one that no one ever mentions, but I've always thought this is a good one. You live stream every single facility that has an election official counting. That live stream is accessible to the public for perpetuity. If they are being supervised literally by a camera, we know from psychological studies and just basic history that, yeah, people act differently when they know they're being surveilled. And so, and that there is a risk of actually being punished, and that punishment actually going through, not getting let out. If we actually had a woman who was convicted of a voter fraud crime in the film, and then a couple of years after the film is released, she was convicted of that same crime. So you actually have to have some enforcement mechanisms for these crimes. You can't just let people out willy-nilly and no punishment for it. So there has to be surveillance, punishment, and then actual enforcement of those laws. But those would help as well. But there's so many different things that could help. Obviously, stopping the counting on election night, preventing the counting in perpetuity is a major that would help a lot, and it is a major concern otherwise.
I would love that, and you're right about the studies about being watched. They did some psychological studies about how they have honor boxes at work or whatever, where it's like the box of candy and you're supposed to drop in $1 or whatever, pay for it, and of course a lot of people would just steal the candy or they would just take it. And they found that if they put a picture on the box, even to the point of just drawing eyes on the note saying, please leave the money, there would be more money left.
I mean,
Just the thought of it is
our
weird.
elections are so insecure. A scarecrow would actually improve what we have currently, because we just don't even have that. And I'll give you an example. I remember voting in California before I moved. It was a bizarre situation because there were no curtains. You always hear about you go behind the curtains to vote. Not only were there not curtains, the election official was looking over my shoulder as I was voting. And it was in the president's section when I was doing that. I mean, it wasn't like we like to pretend that we have the most secure elections. And then, by the way, I was here in Texas, here in Dallas County. My vote didn't count. I voted on election day, and what had happened was because of a machine glitch. And I got this confirmed. This is on videotape with a Dallas election official. It's on my X account. But there was a machine glitch across Dallas County where people were voted for. So I I had already voted when I went on election day. I have never, ever voted on any day but election day. So someone voted for me or it was a machine glitch. Either way, my vote didn't count. I had to vote provisionally, and then they were gonna mail me like confirmation that my vote counted. I never got any of that. Long story short, my vote didn't count. So in Texas and California, there are issues that I have experienced personally, just anecdotally, myself voting.
So ironically, the guy who does a movie on election fraud or documentary on it suffers
Yes.
his vote not counting. Interesting.
And I actually remember back when I was like a Bernie bro, there it was the Hillary Bernie primary. I remember them walking up to certain people and asking, "Do you want to vote provisionally?" And that's basically baiting you. Do you want your vote to not count? Do you want your vote to potentially being counted right at the end? It was kind of it was remarkable. These weren't people who didn't have their ID or weren't registered, and therefore it would be appropriate to ask for a provisional to give them a provisional ballot. These were people who were registered, but potentially they looked like they were voting for the opponent. So let's make them vote provisionally. Let's see if we can sucker some people in. And again, this is all anecdotal. This is not like, pure evidence, but it's just stuff I've witnessed during my experience voting. So uh, I have had there's been many inspirations of why I wanted to make this film. It's because this is just not talked about. And I'm glad that you're even talking about this.
Yeah, I find it interesting. I'm curious too. Are there any standout states in terms of, hey, they're doing it right? Like I thought that Florida might have been one. I'm in Virginia myself, and I haven't read about that many problems in Virginia. I know that every time I go in, I show my ID. They look at my ID.
We
They look at
cover
my
a very
face.
we cover a very infamous example in the film, Abigail Spanberger,
Okay.
uh, where she was losing to Nick Freitas, however you say it, by almost 15,000 votes or something like that. And then they found 14. I remember they had found 14,000 absentee ballots at one point, overlooked absentee ballots, and that is how Abigail Spanberger is in Congress currently, and she's a Democrat powerhouse. Okay.
Former
So,
CIA.
yes. And so again, these people with the intelligence connections happen to, find all these overlooked ballots. Very interesting. But all these states, it's hard to tell you a good state. Let me reverse it and say I could tell you the states that, obviously the states with the most electoral college votes, your New York, Texas, California, etc., Florida, those are going to always have a lot of heat for voter fraud because the stakes are so high. What about the states that have a disproportionate amount of voter fraud for the electoral college votes that they have? Louisiana, New Jersey. These are some historically crooked states where we just had example after example after example for Minnesota because of their experience with mail-in voting, one of the worst. Oregon with their mail-in. I mean,
How was Biden delivered a clear and convincing victory? Mostly by mail. Just like Amazon, it only took a couple of days. 3 out of 4 voters did not vote in person on election day.
it's really hard to give you a good state. Literally, Hawaii, their first election was 1960, and there was accusations of errors or fraud. Right? I can't give you a good state.
That's a sad indictment.
Because okay, here's how I could say it. Every single Mexican state has better voter ID laws than every American state. So I can give you Mexican states to do it right. I can't give you American states.
Okay, so I'm giving you the power, Eric. You can fix it. So we have midterms that are
This
going
is
to be
fun.
coming up in 2026. What could be done? Like let's take the low hanging fruit. What could be done immediately that will correct? I like 80-20 or the Pareto principle, if you will. What
Yeah,
is the 20% thing you could do to fix 80% of the problems?
step one, you're gonna have voter ID, basic voter ID that they have in India.
And
Whoa.
define that. Would that be like what I was saying? I go in, I hold my, they look at me, say, yeah.
Yeah, an actual photo ID. So, okay, there's 15 states currently where you don't need to show anything. In fact, in California, I instinctively was like, okay, I'm going to show you my driver's license. And they were like mad at me like I was exposing myself or something. What are you doing? You can't do that here. I'm just showing you my ID. You can't show your ID. So there's actually states that are resistant to you trying to prove that you are who you are. Step 2, let's see if I can phrase this properly. Um, in Arizona, for instance, it was admitted that 218,000 non-citizens had voted in 2020 alone. Okay, 218,000. And this was like a discussion from Margaret Hoover, who's pretty well-respected journalist on the left. And then we had Kristen Welker talking about non-citizen voting. Oh, it's rare. Rare means it happens. Okay, so we need we need to fix that. That would be nice. A voting on election day should be a national holiday. That would be nice, or at least just incentivize work, or companies to give time off to vote at that time, or at least, just basic. These are basic little things, and then we can go up to like like I said, the more
How
advanced,
about paper
like
ballots?
um look, it's not that taking away the machines doesn't help, but there's a reason why there's a long history of m- elections being rigged even with paper. So it's not the panacea that people describe. Removing the machines does help. I'm not
Well,
saying
or a
it doesn't.
combination that it can be audited. I mean, for example, and I'm only using what I'm familiar with, but here in Virginia, you fill out a paper ballot and it gets scanned by a machine. But then there's stacks of them, that technically, if the numbers or something's weird, they could pull them all out and manually go through all of them.
I'm
So,
glad you mentioned this because what did you just mention? There's a scanner or a tabulator. There's various references to those. We cover this in the film. And actually, that's the voting machine that you should be most concerned about because it has an error rate of up to 5%.
really?
Yes, because just different types of ink, the wrong type of ink can set that off.
Oh, that
Okay.
was Sharpie Gate, right?
Yes, yes. And so this is like, in the end, I am concerned about machines and hacking. It's actually a convoluted way when you can literally just take your scanner, have it set to only a certain amount of inks, have that error rate up to 5% in your enemy's territory. That is some value. That is way better than, I'm going to try and hack into every single, computer in the country. That's kind of hard to do. This is a pretty simple thing. Okay, I'm going to give scanners that are going to have this certain error rate. I'm going to put them in my enemy's territory. Bang. And that's a very that's a common concern. So every machine, it's not just the ones that can be connected to the internet. The ones that can't be connected, that are supposedly not connected, those are just as concerning, if not more concerning to me. I mean, back in the 60s, they would talk about hacking. They would literally put matchsticks under the lever so that you couldn't pull the lever and vote, right? So you can have rudimentary, unsophisticated versions of this hacking. It'll happen to any form of machine. In the 1960 election, we show you footage of the broadcast saying, "Oh, in Chicago, they opened the voting machine and it said, oh, oh, oh," basically saying that someone hacked into that machine. So it has always happened. So it doesn't the internet, that's just one extra variable, but they will always find a way. So even with the paper ballots, for instance, they developed the glass ballot box in the 1800s because not because the voters, they were concerned about the election official stuffing ballots into there. So they wanted a transparent system. And we really, again, if we had a glass ballot box and a scarecrow, we would be ahead of where we are now. Sadly, because it's like that was the peak of election integrity was that glass ballot box.
Wow. All right. So, what are our odds of 2026 being smooth and clean with no problems?
Uh, Primaries and midterms have even higher chances of shenanigans because there's just very little supervision. And we, especially primaries, we go over with primaries on both sides, mind you. The most rigged primary we cover is a Republican primary in the 1970s, the Louisiana governor's race. It was an election where if you won,
Fitzgerald or something like that?
yeah, so Jimmy Fitzsimmons, and so
Fitzsimmons, sorry.
yeah, no, it's no problem. And so he was very poignant in that section of the film, basically saying, one, this is a job that pays $50,000. You're all spending about 27 million combined. If there isn't fraud involved in that, you know what? And so it also shows you that once you get the job, that's where the kickbacks occur, yada yada. But it shows you that the primaries, because there isn't a lot of supervision from the other side. Democrats don't care if the Republicans are cheating in their own primary and vice versa. I mean, it happens so much. And then the midterms, because yeah, again, it's not going to have the same focus and integrity that your general election is going to
Even
have.
even before primaries, what about signatures? Didn't Obama um, have a little bit of help by getting signatures of an opponent not counted to even get on the ballot, so to speak?
Well, are you referring to signature verification?
Right. Well, you have to have X number signatures to even get on the ballot, and some people make a career out of fighting the signatures.
Yeah, I'm not too sure about that. No, I'm not saying what you're saying. I'm just like in the film we cover how the signature verification system is manipulated in Wisconsin. They were able to skirt that in 2020. That's about as far as I know with the signatures. I can't speak to it otherwise.
Okay, I didn't know. All right, so what I like to do with most interviews, and it'd be probably pretty easy for you on this, is I always like to finish with the question of what is the one question that I should have asked you but I neglected to?
Oh no, you did a excellent job. Let me. I think the fun question is, how do all of those elections really tie together? And in the end, the way it all ties together is that the system hasn't really improved or changed. There's always been vulnerabilities. We aren't acknowledging or addressing the vulnerabilities because history has been written by the winners. Those winners have won by cheating. And so they're telling you that it's the most secure election ever because I won. And in reality, no, there are many vulnerabilities in that system. So many people have risen to power through that system. You mentioned LBJ. What had happened was an election official didn't find votes. That's what he had said. He had just wrote names down on a list of people within his county, and it was all the same handwriting, all in alphabetical order at the end of like the list. All those people who were accused of who's allegedly had voted in that election, they all had testified, I didn't vote in that election. But because the election official was an authority figure, his testimony superseded all the people in that town saying, I didn't vote in that election. But and then when the statute of limitations had passed, he had admitted that, yes, I rigged that election for LBJ. And what had happened with LBJ?
Well, ironically, LBJ, if I recall, it got rigged against him before that. He learned the lesson from losing the prior election. He's like, oh, no, no, no. Now I know what I got to do.
I think really the best way to sum all this up is that our system is so insecure that the candidates learned that they have to cheat to win, like NASCAR. If you ain't cheating, you ain't trying. And so LBJ in I think it was 1943, it was that Senate election where he was winning on election night, and then his opponent found votes the days later, that days later phenomenon that you talk about, the after election night syndrome. And that is when he lost. And then he learned, okay, that's the game I have to play next time. And so I wonder that these politicians who go into this system, they may not be corrupt, but when they leave the system, it is undoubted that they are corrupted by the system because they learn they have to cheat to win in most cases. And it's an unfortunate thing, but it has to be acknowledged and addressed or else we really can't move forward.
Wow, great point. Now, Eric, where can people find you and follow you? What do you have going on?
Okay, so I'm a stand-up comedian and documentarian. I have my wife is a amazing stand-up comedian. You can find her at Lila Hart, LILAHART. That's where you can find all of our films, to our documentary films like American History of Voter Fraud. You can find that on her YouTube page. You can find my work at immunetothesystem.com and immunetothesystem.com. And then I am also a producer for the Tara Palmieri show. We just had a David Hogg, James Carville debate, and they actually mentioned it on Bill Maher. And so that was pretty cool for full circle moment for me as I was clipping out Bill Maher. Oh, they mentioned the thing that I was working on. That was cool. But yeah, it was a fiery debate. Definitely
The Raging Cajun against an idiot kid in Florida. That's
yeah,
interesting.
it was a fun, it was a fun one, and I was glad that in the end I've made fun of both of them many times, but I will say I appreciated both them speaking man to man about things, and I feel like that's like one of the biggest issues within the Democrat Party in particular is that they do a lot of purity testing, kicking people out of the tent, and then not speaking to people. And so I do give them a lot of credit for like talking to each other, and I felt like that actually moved the ball forward. And if more Democrats were at least like that, they wouldn't have nearly as many issues. And hopefully the Republicans don't fall into that trap as well when they are in power, because that's usually where you see it. When you're in power, you feel like you can push out any of those voices, and I only want yes men around me. So that's it's always a concern for both sides, and that's again why the film is bipartisan in showing that hey, both sides cheat.
True. Well, Eric, thank you so much.
It was a real pleasure, Eric. I really I appreciate what you're doing. I love supporting independent anyone independent and going at it, and it is something to admire. So I appreciate you fighting for your business in your way.